Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, welcome to the first end of month Q&A video of 2022. I hope you all had great New Year's and breaks over the festive period, and YouTube views are typically very healthy in January, but I think spurred on by the popularity of my pedalboard build video that went up on the 1st of January, this month's views have been off the scale for me, and I've got so many of your comments to get through today. So I'm going to rattle through them as quickly as I can, but hopefully give you some decent, substantial answers in the meantime. So who's up first this month? Paul Stafford Cook. Hi Paul. Hi Joe, thank you for your time on this. Putting a valve in the pedal seems a bit of a gimmick to me if you're playing through a valve amp. The dynamics of valves are already in place within the amp, so my valves react to whatever I hit them with, be it just guitar or guitar plus overdrive or whatever. If I'm going to add valves at the front end, i.e. with a Kingsley pedal, isn't that just valves on valves, i.e. overkill? Is there really a tangible difference to the sound more than just placebo and the big dent in your wallet? Not a hater, brackets, in fact I'd love to try one, just genuinely interested in your thoughts. Cheers Joe. Well Paul, I think it very much depends on how the tube is being used within the pedal. Firstly, whether it's running at proper high plate voltage, 250 volts or whatever, or whether it's at starved voltage. That does change how the tube behaves depending on the design of the pedal. And it depends what you're using the tube for in terms of gain. If you're using it just to create more clean level to then push the tubes in your amp harder, I think the benefits of a tube are kind of in line with solid state boost pedals personally. You tend to get a little bit more clarity in the sound with a tube pedal, in my experience, but in that instance, it's the tubes in your amp that are doing the heavy lifting. You're pushing the signal harder into your amp's tubes, and that's what's creating the overdrive. So solid state tube, it'll be a very similar effect. But if you're using the pedal to create overdrive, as is the case in the Kingsley Jester, which is the video Paul commented on, the tube itself is being used to clip, and that is where you get the real differences between solid state diode clipping or transistor clipping and tubes. So I think if you are using it to create gain, then tube pedals absolutely make sense. If you're using it just for clean level, it depends. It completely depends on your personal preference, whether you want an all-tube signal path or you want to save that bit of space and money on your pedal board and push your amp harder. It's a little bit more in line. But tube overdrive pedals, I really love them. As you will have seen from the pedal board build, there's a lot of tube pedals on this year's board. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, Paul. I know Paul commented later on in the month saying that he's just bought a couple of tube pedals, so I'm looking forward to seeing how you get on, Paul, in that. I'd love to know whether you think they are just gimmicks or whether you kind of buy into the tube pedal once you've tried some out. Bravo Actual. Joe, always love your content. Find your balance. We will be here for you. Wishing you a happy new year. Well, thank you very much for that comment. And this is in response to something I said in the December Q&A, which was in 2022, I'm going to be bringing the number of videos I do each month down just a little bit because I've really been struggling to stay on top. Last year I did a video every 4 days, and now I'm doing a video every 5 days. And genuinely, it has made a noticeable difference in terms of balancing out the other work I do with this channel and all of that. So it really has made a difference. So I hope you haven't noticed too much of a difference in the amount of content coming out, but doing 5 videos a month rather than 8, it's made life so much more bearable for me in terms of getting everything done that I need to do. So thank you for that comment, and I hope you haven't noticed too much of a difference on the channel. DJP Greek. Happy New Year, Joe. Loved your vids, looking forward to more. Excellent. I have a question for your next Q&A. I'm really trying to figure out my Tone Bender Mark III clone and how to use it with a clean amp versus dirtier Marshall style. I feel that it excelled in front of the cleaner amp, but so many people recommend using the fuzz in front of a dirtier amp. Every time I do, it's too saturated and doesn't sound great. Even when I alter the level, fuzz, tone with my Mark III variant, a bias. Any help or advice appreciated? Now, this is something that comes up, especially when I demo a fuzz pedal on this channel, because the typical thing to do throughout history, and this is the people who are most synonymous with using fuzz pedals like Hendrix and people like that, they were using their fuzz pedals into cranked amps. So it was kind of like having an overdrive pedal after your fuzz. But, you're kind of running the fuzz into a gain stage, at least. And people say that that is, the classic sound of a fuzz face pedal or a tone bender in this instance. For me, I prefer the sound of fuzz into clean amps. And especially when you're demoing fuzz pedals, there's pretty much no other genre of effect where really subtle nuances between different transistor types and circuits and whatever are so debated online, and that's what people really want to hear. And if you're taking a fuzz pedal and putting it into a cranked amp, the distortion in the amp will be hiding a lot of those differences. So I prefer fuzzers into clean amps, and I don't usually run a fuzz into an overdrive pedal, for example. So it might be the classic way of doing it, but ultimately it's whatever works for you. If you prefer the sound of a fuzz into a clean amp, run your fuzz into a clean amp. Just because other people say, no, you shouldn't do that, doesn't mean it shouldn't work for you. We're all different, we all have different preferences. So whatever floats your boat, really. If you prefer fuzzers into clean amps, run fuzzers into clean amps. Slow Hand Blues, Dreamboard, incredible, thank you. I have a couple of the pedals shown, Retrosonic Flanger and Origin Cali 76. I really dig the Kingsley Jester and Page and feel gas coming on. Those two Kingsley pedals, the Jester and the Page, are probably my two favourite overdrive pedals I've ever played. Hands down. They are absolutely spectacular. So if you're in the market for another overdrive pedal and you don't mind waiting 6-7 months for one, get on the Kingsley waiting list. You shall not be disappointed. Mark Zug, Glorious Noise. When you were running some pedals with 15 volts or other, are those pedals spec'd for those volts, or were you trial and erroring it? Definitely not trial and erroring it. When it comes to running pedals at different voltages, absolutely 100% check with the manufacturer, in the manual, whatever, that pedal can take the voltage you're giving it. If you give a pedal too little voltage, it either won't sound right or won't turn on, depending on the pedal. If you give it too much voltage, it will go bang and you will damage your pedal. So never, ever, ever trial and error it when it comes to running higher voltages with a pedal. Lots of them will say on the top 9 to 18 volts, so you can go anywhere between that. Manuals might say 9 volts only, stick to 9 volts. If in doubt, email the manufacturer and ask them, but never leave that to chance, because you will damage your pedal running it at a higher voltage than it's spec'd to actually take. Jeremiah McCann. I'm confused as to why tap tempo makes a pedal not true analog. If I have a robot walk over and push play on my vinyl record player, it doesn't make my record player digital. I guess if we are following Perky's why do I use analog logic, of which I am a believer in, tap tempo digital control would make it harder to repair and draw more current. Either way, thank you for the content. I look forward to more analog goodness. Fantastic. The reason tap tempo kind of makes a pedal not true analog, or not all analog at least, is that for tap tempo to work, the pedal basically needs to interpret what you are tapping into it and essentially have intelligence. Go, there's this amount of gap between those clicks, therefore the tempo should be this. It needs to calculate that, and you can't do that in the analog domain. So it needs to have some element of digital control. So even if we're talking a delay pedal, for example, if the through signal is all analog and the delay tails are Bucket Brigade delay chips, so all analog, depending on who you ask, but all analog for the sake of this, if a pedal has tap tempo, it will have some element of digital control circuitry in there somewhere. Even if it's not going anywhere near the actual signal or the effect, it will have an element of digital control. It won't draw a huge amount more current because it's not doing too much processing, it just needs to do a very simple job. But it does mean that pedals with tap tempo have some digital circuitry in them. So the signal might be all analog, the effect might be all analog, but the pedal itself isn't all analog strictly. And you know, in that example of the robot turning on a record player, it's probably the difference between a robot walking over and turning your record over, or the record player actually coming with a robot built into it to do that. So it's, you know, we're talking, you know, absolute nonsense to most people here, but that's what I was meaning by tap tempo not being true analog, is because it does rely on some digital control in order to compute what you're tapping in. David Sanderson. Hi Joe, do you get feedback problems with these unpotted humbuckers? Not so much, but I'm a low to medium gain player at best. Now, if you saw my video, which we'll talk about in a minute, all about how I record audio for my demos, you'll have seen that I play brutally loud in this room. And sometimes if I'm using an amp that is right next to me, like here, and I've got the guitar buried in that, then yes, sometimes they can squeal at high volume. But usually, as long as you're sensible and you're standing a bit of away from the amp's maybe turned away from you, and you're not using kind of a Boss Metal Zone or something, I never have too many problems. Personally, I've played live with unpotted humbuckers at stage volume in decent sized venues. It's never been too much of an issue. So yeah, it depends how you use them. And you're not going to put an unpotted PAF pickup in a guitar and play Slipknot standing right in front of a 100-watt amp. That's not wise. But for most kind of vintage type sounds, low to medium gain, you should be absolutely fine. I never have too much of a problem in this room. Enrico Palazzo. High watts are my favourite British amps. This amp sounds really good and takes pedals extremely well. I don't remember if it was with the telly, but somewhere in the video there was this cool natural feedback from the amp that was so pleasing. This is my favourite of the Brit amps you have, Joe. Second place, the orange. Well, sadly, I don't actually own that amp. I had it on demo from Hylight, so it's not actually my amp, but it's a wonderful sounding thing. That's the Hylight Custom SD VR204, which is essentially the high watt DR504 circuit in a 20-watt format. So it's, you know, it's kind of the high watt thing, just a little bit tweaked with a few modern features. Wonderful, wonderful sounding amp. I was a big fan of that. It really hurt to give that one back. The Radical Kindness. Man, that amp sounds great with all the guitars. Les Paul Jr. had some extra magic today with that amp though. It would be interesting to hear the head through some different speakers. Yeah, absolutely. The Les Paul Jr. is one of those guitars that I never really want to play, but whenever I use it in a demo and listen back to the audio, it's always one of the best sounding guitars there. It really, really works, even though it's not something I would naturally gravitate towards. So yeah, the Junior sounded amazing into the Hylight. Other speakers, I did experiment with other speakers, because when I picked the amp up from the shop to demo it, I thought I'd just check it worked when I got it home. So I plugged it into my Zilla Studio Pro, which had a Celestian Gold and Scumbag S75 PVC in it. And my first impressions of the amp were, wow, that's pokey in the mid-range. Then I put it with the Fane speakers that it's designed to go with, which have a more relaxed mid-range in terms of the speakers, and it just sounded absolutely godly. So I think the Fane speakers are definitely a very big part of the high watt / Hylight sound, and with other speakers it kind of was a little bit much in that mid-range, because the high watt circuit is known for that kind of scratchy mid-range, and if you're putting it into two speakers that also have a big kind of spike in the scratchy mid-range, it can, you know, rip your eardrums off. Whereas with the Fanes that are a bit more relaxed and full frequency, it just made so much more sense. So I did experiment, but the true voice of that amp and that circuit are the Fane speakers. The 92 Project. Joe, do you use an attenuator? I'm looking for an amp and attenuation or killer master volume is a prime concern for me. Hearing health, family in the house. I wonder if that even crosses your mind when auditioning amps. Killer video. I do have an attenuator. It's not something I use very often in videos, but if, for example, I'm just practicing and I want to crank an amp up, but I don't want to kill anybody, I can just click it down. It's the Dr. Z brake light I've got, which I think is spec'd up to 45 watts, I think. So all of my amps, bar the orange, which has a master volume, are 35 watts and below. So it works fine for me. I didn't need the full air brake, I think they call it, like the 100-watt version. So I do have one, and it's generally in line when I'm practicing, and I click it down just to kind of take the edge off things. But in demo videos, no, very, very rarely do I use an attenuator. I like to get things really, really loud and feeding back and everything working, the speakers compressing, all that sort of lovely stuff that makes things sound really nice. But I do use one for sure. Gaming with Mr. Givil, I think. I've got an 8-pin from 83ish and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Still scratching my head why this was replaced with the SD1 and never reissued other than the collector's box of 3 pedals for outrageous money. And this is, I'm not sure where it's gone now, the Boss OD1, that kind of the original Tube Screamer circuit is kind of what Maxon took, made it not asymmetrical clipping and added the tone control, and that kind of became the TS-808. Yeah, I'm surprised too, to be honest. The only thing I can assume is the 14-pin chip is really hard to come by, because I had my OD1 modded by Analog Man to kind of convert it back to a 14-pin chip specification, but I'm guessing those chips are so expensive that it wouldn't make sense for Boss to do it as a production run, or if they were going to reissue it with the 8-pin chip, it would be so close to a Tube Screamer and every other boutique tube screamer that has asymmetrical clipping on the market, that it wouldn't really make sense in their model and their price point. I would have thought at some point we would probably see an OD1 Wazacraft, maybe, but I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe it might be too close to the tube screamer, which everybody makes, so it would be a sort of, dead duck in the market. Who knows? But it's one of my favourite overdrive pedals. Absolutely astonishing thing. Dan Lapel. Just got my Jester version 2 with sizzle knob a few weeks ago, and I'm now listing just about all my other overdrive and gain pedals for sale. Yeah, it is astonishing, the Jester. The sizzle knob, it's something that makes all the difference. If you're like me and you like clarity and definition in the high end of your overdrives, you can just dial it in just a little bit and suit it to any amp that you might be putting it into. It's wonderful. So yeah, Kingsley stuff, cannot recommend highly enough. Reckless Toboggan. Boutique hand-wired British voice tower of hell. Poetry. Simply poetry. And this is comparing the Orange, Marshall, Vox and Hi-Watt circuits. When I had the Hylight here, I wanted to compare the four kind of cornerstones of British amps. And yeah, it got really, really loud. And I thought that was quite an apt description of having them all piled up behind me. Peeve, I think. Nicely done, lots of effort went into this video. I was surprised that I was drawn to the tone of the orange. Also on this video, Bluesful. That Hylight sounds great in most of the examples there. I'd go with something different for the max gain, but obviously that's a subjective taste thing. Also on the video, Eric Carpenter. All very different, but that JTM 45 for the classic rock gain and clean. And also on the video, Kira Barsmith. Great comparison, really enjoyed hearing the differences. If I had to choose one, I would go with the Dr. Z. Now the reason I put these four comments in together is my favourite thing about that four-way shootout is everybody had such different preferences for what they liked. And it just shows why that video was an interesting and possibly necessary thing to do. Is everybody wants something different. Some people loved the orange and hated the Marshall. Some people loved the Marshall but hated the Hylight. Some people loved the Hylight and hated the Dr. Z. It was just a real kind of mixing pot of people's preferences. So it was lovely to see that and just get your perspective on things. They were all phenomenal amps, but just seeing which way people would go in terms of their personal tastes was really fascinating. Matt Johnson, awesome comparison. I can only imagine how loud that got. With the 50-watt orange cranked up with the master volume on full about a metre behind me, it was like being punched by a heavyweight boxer in the back of the head. It was brutal. Curious, as a lefty, is there any particular make or model of guitar you've always wanted to play but have just never come across a left-handed version? Wow, lots, to be honest. And I should say that I buy pretty much everything I ever buy secondhand just to save money. I don't mind using used gear with a few dents on it, if it means I can make what little funds I have go a bit further. And so I'm always on the lookout for left-handed used guitars. The one that comes to mind that I've always really wanted, and I've only ever seen one crop up secondhand, is a Gibson Firebird. Always wanted one of them, and the one that did crop up, A, I was skint at the time so I couldn't afford it, but B, it was one of those probably like studio entry-level models. I don't think any Gibson's entry-level really, but it kind of satin sort of wine red finish. It just didn't look particularly nice. But if a 2 or 3 pickup kind of the classic sort of tobacco burst Firebird ever comes up second-hand in left hand, I'm going to jump on that if I'm able to. Other than that, I've never tried Fender offsets like the Jaguar or the Jazzmaster. I'd love to try one of them. And I've always kind of secretly wanted a Gretsch White Falcon, even though it's not a guitar I would probably use all that much. It was just something about the sort of obnoxiously huge white and gold body that I just really like. So I'd love one of them, but they're thousands and thousands of pounds, and I wouldn't get the use out of it that trying to justify that outlay would, command. So yeah, I think for me a Gibson Firebird is the one that I'm always on the lookout for. But there's plenty of guitars that I want. I don't necessarily need them, but I always want them. Scott Brockway. The funny thing is, YouTube audio compression destroys all the high end anyways, and it has that weird, mushy, splattery phasing, so you can't really hear top end definition. Now, this is going on to the video I made all about how I record YouTube audio, kind of in response to a thread on the gear page where people are saying that no YouTuber can be trusted. And I've actually made another video, which is going to be out in a couple of weeks, all about YouTube compression and looking into whether it's a problem, how bad is it if it exists, all that sort of stuff. Now, of course, that was a really difficult video to make because by definition, any audio that you'd be listening to on YouTube has been uploaded and processed by YouTube. So I can't just take YouTube audio and the raw audio and go, can you hear the difference? Because by definition, the raw audio would then be processed by YouTube. I did find a kind of backdoor way into talking about it and showing it, but spoiler alert, YouTube audio isn't that bad. It does change it a little bit, but it's not chronic, and you can still pick out 99% of what I'm trying to get across in a gear demo by listening to it on YouTube. It's not as bad as people make out, it really isn't. Octave box. Isn't it inevitable that some people in every aspect of life do shady things with corrupt intentions? Yep, absolutely. But I think the point I was trying to make in that video is most people that I come across on YouTube, and I speak to other YouTubers, most people are doing it for absolutely the right reasons, and they're just trying to do a better job in getting the fundamentals of whatever they're demoing across to the viewer. They're not trying to mislead anybody. And that was a real theme in that gear page thread of all YouTubers are trying to do is sell you product and deceive you, and people, you go and buy the same pedal that I've demoed and it sounds rubbish and it's I got you to spend your money. It's not the case at all. 99% of YouTubers are doing it for absolutely the right, honest reasons. But yes, you will of course get a few kind of muppets out there. But it can't be all YouTube demos, or even the majority. If YouTube demos are so inaccurate with all their studio tricks, then why do Strats, Tube Screamers and Plexis always sound like Strats, Tube Screamers and Plexis, no matter how crappy or fancy the studio? Exactly. It's very subjective in terms of how someone like me puts a video together, what amp I use, microphones, if any processing is used in the post-mix, which I don't do, but others do. It's completely subjective, but ultimately a Plexi should sound like a Plexi, and a Plexi does sound like a Plexi in most videos. Same for Tube Screamers, same for Strats, any guitar. The essence of what I'm trying to say hopefully comes across in these videos, and that's true for, again, 99% of YouTubers. The Tone Lounge. I think it's fair for people to mistrust YouTubers initially, since there's a lot of fake content and disinformation out there. Educating your audience, as you did here, is the best way to build trust. A lot of people seem to assume there is a way to substitute the experience of trying a piece of gear for yourself. That is just impossible to do. Yep, trying something out is the only way to know whether it's going to work for you. Ideally trying it with your guitar in your rig and seeing how it works for you. That's the only way to know. And trust is the number one word on YouTube. Hopefully, my core audience trust me to give you the most honest, accurate representation of what I'm demoing and not try to mislead you in any way. And that takes years to build up. If you're going on there as a salesman trying to sell something, people are naturally going to be skeptical, as the Tone Lounge points out. But if you're just someone in their room trying to, show you cool gear, hopefully you can kind of build that trust up over time. And one of my favourite comments that I get fairly often is, I bought this pedal you demoed, great job, it sounds exactly as I was expecting it to based on your video, which is exactly what I want to see. I never want to mislead anybody, so that's the whole reason I do what I do. Matt Warren. It seems there is a very prevalent mindset on the gear page where people assume literally everyone out there is trying to trick them into overpaying for stuff they don't really want. Not exclusive to the gear page, but this seems to be where I see this the most, or at least where guitar forums are concerned. Absolutely. One thing I've always liked about your videos is that my ears have always been able to detect that you were capturing a very detailed and accurate representation of how the gear you are using actually sounds in person with minimal post-processing. Exactly. Thank you for that comment, Matt, because that is exactly what I try and do. There is no post-processing aside from balancing out the mics, and that's what comes out of your speakers. And I want you to have as close to the experience I have sat in this room with the amp behind me as you can. It's never going to be the same coming through little earbuds or whatever, but get the sort of the basic essence of what I'm experiencing across to you guys. That's what I try and do, so thank you for that comment. Monkey Magic. Thanks, Joe. What I have a problem with is YouTubers not declaring their content includes paid promotion, be that through payment, free stuff, or discounted gear, etc. It's not about whether they make a profit, it's about being transparent like a clon. Thank you for your vids. Exactly, and this is something that's been bubbling under the surface for years. It became a much hotter topic a year or two ago when Shane at In The Blues made a video with some other YouTubers all about paid promotion. And in many countries, especially in the UK, it's legal. It's a legal requirement to declare that you are giving a paid promotion in some way. And as you say, it doesn't necessarily mean you've been paid. It could just be that you've been lent the piece of gear, or you've been given it in payment for doing the video, or whatever. if you've had any sort of outside influence from a manufacturer to make a video, you have to declare that. So when you click on one of my videos and it comes up in the top corner saying includes paid promotion, that means I've worked with a manufacturer in some capacity to bring you that video. And it's a legal requirement for me to do that. And I think it is in most countries around the world. So absolutely. And if people don't declare that, that is a bit misleading and that is wrong for sure. David Sharple, this comment made me laugh. About misleading reviews, my opinion, YouTube should never substitute your personal experience. Absolutely. So if in doubt about a camel advertiser, go to your trustworthy dealer. Try the camel before eventually buying the camel. No artifact and no seller can mislead the report between you and the camel when you're riding it. Really, that's the best way avoiding people polishing camel turds. I mean, it's a beautiful way of putting it, but I completely agree. About microphones, just recording with just one, yeah, does the job. But if you know what to do, more than two can give great results, as four do just great in Joe's records. Just a hint, normal starter kits for drums are like 4 or 5 microphones. Last I heard, Billy Cobham uses up to 16 mics for his set. I've heard of drummers using a lot more than 16 mics. Drum kits are a bit different because you get a lot of phase cancellation because you've got, 12, 15 different sound sources between different drums and cymbals, and they can all kind of phase with each other when you get bleed over in mics. But in guitar amps, yeah, absolutely. A ribbon to capture the low end, a dynamic to capture the mid-range, a condenser to capture the high end, and a room mic to give the kind of three-dimensionalness. That works for me. They're getting it across way, way more than just one mic in a very localized point on a single speaker cone can. So yeah, it all comes down to good engineering. If you know what you're doing and avoid that phase cancellation, you can get much, much more accurate results in terms of giving a representation of what I have here in the room using multi-mics rather than just one, 100%. GB Bruno. Very interesting and enjoyable video, thank you. In your experience, is the Hudson Broadcast really as noisy a pedal as some say? I would not mind if it's noisy at high gain settings, but if it has significant noise at low gain, I could not use it in my rig. And this comment really surprised me because I've never found the Hudson Broadcast to be noisy in the slightest, even when it's really gained up. So at clean gain, it's, to me, it's never had any noise problems. Maybe I just got really lucky with my particular pedal, but, I've never had any noise problems with the Hudson Broadcast. So, yeah, I would definitely not say that's a noisy pedal at all. Ignore the dog barking. And finally this month, Al Lakazoo. You should really try the Tubesteader Sunkeeper next. It's great, orange flavour. Keep an eye out for that. Might be coming in the next month or two. I'm not 100% sure yet, but fingers crossed I might be able to get my hands on one of them and bring it to you. So there we are, folks. A lot of questions this month, but hopefully we did a good job of getting through them in a timely fashion. Any more questions, please drop them down in the comments or comment on any video in the next month and I'll try and address them at the end of February. Some interesting content coming next month, the YouTube compression video. I'm going to try and get the Valbrook Kaluna tube overdrive demoed soon and get that out as quickly as I can. A phenomenal pedal, definitely up there with like the Kingsleys and the Effectros in terms of tube overdrives. And yes, a few other bits that I want to get together. But yes, some decent content coming in February. So thank you ever so much for watching, folks. I hope these Q&As continue to be interesting because I really enjoy doing them. And please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it makes a big difference when you do that. So thanks, folks, and I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.